Hello, class. This is chapter 12, and we're going to talk about evolution. Evolution, chapter 12, evolution. All right, so what is evolution? Evolution helps explain some of the features of organisms, from microbes to human beings, and the different features that we have, and why certain things have different features, and certain features have been more productive over time, and an organism or has evolved due to certain features being more beneficial to the fitness or the life of that organism. So evolution occurs when there are changes in heritable traits, so passing down traits, which we talked about in chapter 10, from generation to generation. And so evolution, as we have changes that are passed down, uh, we have the process of evolution happening. Evolution occurs in different populations, right? So in a population, an allele frequency, remember alleles are the two locations of a gene. You can have dominant, you can have recessive allele, you can have incomplete dominance, you can have alleles that work together to affect a certain trait, or you can have one trait, you can have multiple traits affected by one type of allele, so, but it's talking about like the different versions of the gene. And so in a population, allele frequencies change from one generation to the next, right? So certain alleles are expressed in certain populations over time through generations. In the population of Asia, the allele for black hair is high, right? A lot of people who are in the Asian population have that allele for black hair. Population of Sweden, the frequency of alleles that produce black hair is low, right? There are not many people there with the genes for black hair, therefore that allele is low in that population. But if Swedish people were to migrate to Asia, then the gene pool in Asia will evolve. It'll include probably a mixture of, you'll get more hair colors. There were different scientists that contributed to the theory of evolution. I don't need you to know all the scientists, but there's a cool chart here you can look at and see some of the people who were involved in us figuring out that evolution was even a thing. And that leads us to natural selection, which basically is saying that nature selects for reproductive success. So the organism that survives is going to be the one that is more able to survive. So let's just say, for instance, in the previous example, if people with dark hair lived longer in in Asia, for instance, just for an example, let's say the dark hair protected them more from the sun, therefore people with dark hair had less skin cancer. Let's just say, as an example, this is not necessarily true, but I'm just saying as an example. And so people with dark hair then would live longer, and so that allele would get transmitted more likely to be transmitted, and so you would see more and more people with dark hair. That's kind of the idea. So we have uh, nature selecting for the reproductive success. So we have genetic variation, we have limited resources, we have overproduction of offspring. These are things that we can observe in nature, and then we can see how there's a struggle for existence. Certain things, you know, different organisms are competing to survive, and so certain things are going to survive more than others. Unequal reproductive success. Some animals can have multiple offspring and they all live, or the majority of them live, and some they don't. And then you also have descent with modification. Over many generations, the population characteristics can change by natural selection, giving rise to new species. Humans can artificially alter allele frequencies, and we do this when we breed. So, for instance, we can breed for certain traits, and so they'll take a dog that is strong and a dog that is fast and breed them together and make a fast, strong dog, for instance, or they'll breed for a certain color of dog or certain characteristics, like a dog that's very loyal, that is a worker dog. And so we can artificially select certain traits, not necessarily based on making the dog live longer, but just based on the traits we want to have present in the dog. But natural selection is not like artificial selection. Natural selection does not create alleles, but it strongly selects for alleles that arise by chance. So as you know, dark hair, light hair, uh, certain ones will survive better than other ones. And so natural selection will help, not necessarily with hair, but will help figure some of those things out. So each generation, the best camouflage seahorse in this example survives. So seahorses have different colors, but the color seahorse that blends in most with the surroundings in this instance uh, survive will survive have the best chance of survival. So that is sort of the environment naturally selecting a certain color. In this case, like that the color that camouflages that seahorse with its surroundings will be will live longest and pass down their alleles to the next generation. So we have natural selection, and then um, due to limited resources, we cannot some due to limited resources. You've heard the saying, the strong survive, or the ones that can have better access to the resources uh, will will survive. Adaptations can enhance reproductive success. So as traits are passed down, you certain traits will help an organism to better adapt to the environment, the resources, the situation that they are in. So I might inherit the ability to be, uh, uh, for instance, inherit the ability to be strong, physically strong from my father, for instance, and that can help give me an advantage over other organisms that may be weaker, and that can be passed down. In this case, in the example here on the slide, this flower tastes bad, so the plant is not eaten by its predators. Therefore, it lives longer. Therefore, it has more opportunity to reproduce. Bacteria can undergo natural selection. Bacteria, we know viruses and bacteria actually can become resistant to antibiotics. This is one of the reasons, for instance, with COVID-19 and things like that, we have to continue to make a new vaccine every so often, because the old vaccine, you have different strains of the virus, or strains in this case on the screen of antibiotics. I mean, strains of the bacteria. As the bacteria um, duplicates, and there are mutations, or there's adaptations as we call them, uh, they may develop through changes in their genetics. They may develop a resistance to the antibiotics, because the one that if the bacteria's DNA mutates, and that mutated DNA, let's say, for instance, is able to resist a certain antibiotic, then now we have to change the antibiotic so that we can kill the bacteria. So resistance alleles become more frequent in the population over time. So a bacteria that has mutated, it's changed its DNA has changed from generation to generation. There's been a change somehow in the DNA. Now that the old antibiotics won't kill that bacteria, so that new strain of bacteria will live longer over time until a new antibiotic is created. Evolution never stops. As long as we have DNA, you will have evolution. Um, these DNA is constantly, remember, from mitosis and meiosis, DNA is constantly being copied and transcribed and split. We go through the process of uh, mitosis and meiosis. And so these things are constantly happening, and we're constantly being affected by our environment. The ones that can survive will live longer, and the ones that have uh, certain traits as the environment continually changes, ones with certain, the organisms with certain traits that do not adapt well to their environments will not live, and therefore certain alleles, certain variations in the DNA will live longer. Evolution therefore will keep the best alleles in the population. They will get passed on to the next generation. And we call this term the survival of the fittest. And the word fitness, we think of fitness in the uh, you think most people think of fitness, they think of being in shape and I got tight abs, or I got a firm butt. But fitness describes an organism's genetic contribution to the next generation, right? So we want to keep going with, keep reproducing, so to speak. So orchids in this example that are best suited to wasp pollination are the most fit because they're the most likely to reproduce. So I'm ha- I have 4 kids. If somebody else could only have 1 kid, by biological definition, I am more fit in that regard. I'm passing on more DNA to the next generation. Fitness also includes surviving, not just reproducing. So having offspring that survive, and we want to. The idea is that we, if we look at it from a biologist point of view, we want to not only live so that we can reproduce, but then have that generation reproduce, and then that generation reproduce, and that having something that continues to reproduce is something that is very fit. Scientists can test evolution. So evolution, you can test it against allele frequencies that do not change from one generation to the next. In this example here, in this ferret population, the dominant allele D and recessive D confer a phenotype of fur color. Dominant is dark fur over recessive light fur. 64 of the 100 ferrets have dark fur, and the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is the unlikely situation in which allele frequencies do not change between generations, right? So they believe that uh, allele frequencies generally will change as we go generation to generation to generation. So this at equilibrium, allele frequencies do not change, and this would happen if natural selection does not occur. Then there would be no change. If no mutations in the DNA occurred, there would be no change. The population is large enough to eliminate random changes. Individuals mate at random, and there's no migration, no moving away from the population. And so we can test and see, will evolution occur? If we look at a population over time, over multiple generations, we can see, has evolution occurred or have things just stayed the same? Um, so in real populations, natural selection and mutations do occur. Random changes in allele frequencies are common. Individuals rarely mate at random. Cute people like cute people, and there's always some level of migration. So that means migration for humans would be like, people who were born in Philly moving to LA, for instance. So natural selection can shape populations in many ways. Um, there are three modes of natural selection: directional, disruptive, and stabilizing. They're distinguished by their effects on the phenotypes. Right, so directional selection favors one phenotype over another. So the black moths survive and reproduce more than light moths. If you think about it, the black moths, their dark color helps them live longer. Therefore, they can reproduce more. So that's directional selection. Disruptive selection, very light and very dark snails both survive and reproduce more than the intermediate colored snails, right? So sort of like the ones on each end survive and reproduce more than the intermediate colored. Then you have stabilizing selection. Medium-sized babies survive and reproduce more than very large or very small babies, right? So if things are more medium-sized, more in the middle, they seem to survive and produce more. And we actually see that with human beings. So why are harmful alleles sometimes maintained in a population? One explanation for that is heterozygote advantage, in which a heterozygote is favored over a homozygous. Remember, heterozygous means you have a dominant and a recessive allele. Sickle cell allele is harmful. It causes sickle cell disease, SCD, but it also, they found out that it is beneficial for fighting off malaria. And so those with sickle cell were more, even though sickle cell is harmful, they were more likely to survive malaria. And so areas that had malaria, that were high in malaria, they did well in. So this is talking about that example right here. People with sickle cell able to be less susceptible to malaria. And so, even though sickle cell is not good for you, people with sickle cell survived longer because they were able to live in a malaria infested environment. And we also have sexual selection. Sexual selection directly influences reproductive success. So building complex nests, flashing showy plumage, budding heads of rival males all appear to waste energy. But how can natural selection allow for traits that apparently reduce survival? Well, you have sexual selection, results from variations in the ability to obtain mates. Right? So not only do I need to live to be able to reproduce, but I also have to be able to uh, have a mate. So sexual selection results from either from competition uh, for access to the other sex. So for instance, um, I'm in a human sense, we kind of compete, but not really. But a lot of animals compete for the ability to be able to mate with the opposite sex. So there's a sexual selection. I can outdo or outbattle other males to be able to mate with this female. And then we have mutations, which can cause evolution to occur. So mutations are random changes in the sequence of DNA, and we know that uh, DNA is simply a code. It is a nucleus. uh, nucleotides, base pairs, in a certain order, make up the molecule known as DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. But you can have a change. Just changing out one base pair can switch up the whole DNA. So the changes can be harmful or they can be harmless, and some can be even beneficial. Right? Depends on the type of change. Genetic drift is the random sampling error. Low frequencies dramatically and often become eliminated when one population survives to reproduce. And just you're changing just little by little. Uh, when only a few individuals establish a new population, their allele frequency might change. This process illustrates the founder effect. So this is why we don't. This is kind of the downside to people mating only in their family, and that is popular in some places in the world where people marry their cousins and their sisters, uh, and it's socially acceptable in some places in the world, but that will increase the the likelihood of certain alleles being passed from generation to generation, and so that's called founder effect. Population bottlenecks can cause genetic drift. So a population bottleneck occurs if a disaster drastically reduces the size of a population. So same thing as if we only made it in our own family, certain alleles that maybe not as frequent in the entire population would become very frequent if we only made it with each other. Same thing would happen if there was a disaster. Let's just say, like, you had, instead of, a million people in Philadelphia, you only had, 50 people in Philadelphia, and we all had to, keep the world, keep the population going. So we had to mate with each other. Then there would be a lot less frequency of certain genes and alleles, and that would be population bottleneck. So that would cause certain genes and alleles that may not uh, appear as much if there were a million people, would cause them to be at a much higher rate of appearance because we're a much smaller population. Non-random mating causes evolution to occur, so sexual selection and artificial selection can alter mating patterns. So, the fact that we do breed dogs and things like that, cats, dog, we do certain breeding. So we try to make certain dogs or certain they try to breed certain animals to make them more common than they naturally would be, but that leads to a evolution in and of itself, because now this these alleles and this DNA is occurring more frequently. They're mating, and so it's gonna change the population. So it's gonna evolve. And then gene flow causes evolution. So gene flow moves alleles between populations. So similar to migration, you have gene flow. So in this picture, the brown rabbit goes and mates with the black rabbits. So there's the brown gene now gets mixed in with the black gene, and you get if there's an incomplete dominance, you'll get a sort of a little bit a mixture of the two. And so these are ways that evolution can alter allele frequencies, and it's an interesting thing to study, the different ways that evolution can alter. The end.